We have been building the greatest life-saving institution on the Atlantic, and through our efforts, the historic graveyard of the coast may be closed. Personally, should it serve no other purpose than the saving of thousands of lives from perishing off the Cape, I shall feel my own efforts are repaid.
History tells us Governor Bradford and Miles Standish were first to envision the idea of a canal to expand trade for the Plymouth colony.
Well, you may well have heard of Aptuxet. That's the name of the trading post where the Pilgrims brought their goods to trade with members of the colony, which is today's New York City, as well as to trade with the Native Americans. Well, to get to Aptuxet, the Pilgrims had to come down today's what we call Cape Cod Bay. They would then enter the Scusset River, and that would end, and they would have to portage overland for many, many miles with the goods being carried on their backs over a hilly terrain. It was a very difficult trek, but the reason they did that is that finally, after this many miles, the Manomet River, today's Monument River, appeared, and it was on that river that the Aptuxet trading post existed. So the governor of the Plymouth colony, Governor William Bradford, conceived the idea, why not just connect these two rivers, and you'd have a water route right from Plymouth colony direct to Aptuxet.
Mention of a canal again came to the forefront in 1697. This was when the Massachusetts General Court passed a resolution to do a survey and come up with a plan. No survey was ever done. Years passed by. In 1768, the Boston Chronicle published a letter again pointing out the need for a canal. During the Revolutionary War, British ships sailed around the Cape, sinking and capturing American vessels. George Washington saw a need for a canal to give greater security to the American fleet against its enemies. In 1776, General Washington ordered Thomas Macon, an engineer with the Continental Army, to investigate the feasibility of a canal. He prepared a survey and recommended that a canal be built. But incentive and financing never combined at the right time to produce what almost everyone agreed was necessary. April 16, 1801, Thomas Batchelor petitioned to have the building of a canal on the Sandwich Town warrant.
I have made a survey of the lands on the line for a proposed canal from the Bay of Massachusetts to Buzzards Bay, and I am fully convinced of the practicality of making navigable the said proposed canal. Moreover, I have obtained the consent of the principal landowners through which said canal must pass.
At the town meeting on May 14, 1801, the voters spoke. They voted in favor of a canal. There was great excitement anticipating that a canal would finally be built. This is one of the reasons Deming Jarvis chose Sandwich in which to build his glass factory in 1825.
The small town of Sandwich saw a big change in that Deming Jarvis, the founder of the Boston and Sandwich Glass Company, came to Sandwich to start his business. He chose Sandwich as the site of his factory because of the woods to stoke the furnaces, as well as the land could be purchased cheaply, and a good quantity of land could be purchased cheaply. He also chose Sandwich because there was a proposal to build a canal in 1825. He was a member of the legislature at the time, so he knew about this proposal. And so he started to buy up land to build his factory, and probably for where the canal might be going through also. He situated his factory near that proposed entrance so he could get his goods to market, as well as to bring in ingredients for his factory. He could not use the local sand, so a canal would have been very good in that most of the sand that he first imported was from the Morris River Valley of New Jersey, and then later it was from the Berkshire Hills. So a canal would have been very fortuitous for him to bring the sand to the factory location.
When Deming Jarvis came to Sandwich to open up his Boston and Sandwich glass factory, there really weren't any experienced glass workers here in this little village. So he needed some. And where did he get them? He got them from East Cambridge, Massachusetts. And he moved about 60 of those men down here into the village. As it turned out, they were the early influx of immigrants to this town because they happened to be Irish. In fact, they were Irish Catholics from the old country. Many of them started out as workers in the factory, and some of them had an experience of upward mobility. James Keenan was one of those folks. He started out as a factory worker, saved enough money to open up a saloon, did well enough in the saloon, he opened up a series of stores and became quite successful and was a great example of upward mobility during this early period in the 1800s in our little town of Sandwich.
Finally, in 1870, the Cape Cod Ship Canal Company was granted a charter to dig a canal. Work was to start in 2 years and be completed in 7. Another company, headed by Henry H. Whitney, entered the scene in 1880. The Commonwealth stated he would be granted a charter to build the canal in November of that year, unless the Cape Cod Ship Canal Company spent $100,000 on a construction project by that time. If the Cape Cod Ship Canal Company did not meet the deadline, it would have to turn over all its land and all its materials to Whitney without compensation. Still, no work was done until September 15th of 1880, when the Cape Cod Ship Canal Company arranged to have a work crew of 112 Italian laborers from New York City, swinging picks and shovels at Town Neck to dig a ditch 200 feet wide at the top, sloped to 66 feet wide at the bottom, and 55 feet in depth, all to be dug by hand. A ceremonial wheelbarrow full of sand was dug at 7 a.m. that day by James Keenan, an Irish immigrant who once worked at the Boston and Sandwich Glass Company.
October 2nd, 1880, Sandwich Independent. The subcontractor was taken down to the scene of the action by James Keenan of Sandwich, and when ready to work, the contractor passed the shovel to Mr. Keenan and said, "Mr. Keenan, you are to have the honor of the first shovelful of earth for the Cape Cod Canal." When Mr. Keenan had thrown the first shovelful into a wheelbarrow, he exclaimed, "Now, you fellas go ahead and finish it."
Also on that day, September the 15th, Emma Gregory, who was a decorator at the glass factory in Sandwich, wrote in her diary,
"About 150 Italians came into town yesterday to work on the canal. Began work today. They are a hard-looking crowd."
Emma Gregory was a glass decorator at the Boston and Sandwich Glass Company. She and her sister Mary relocated to Sandwich from Providence. Her mother Hannah was actually native born to Sandwich, and when her husband died, she moved the family back to Sandwich.
Within 2 weeks, there were between 400 and 500 Italian workers at Town Neck.
Seaside Press, October 2nd, 1880. This old town has a new sensation, the ship canal, just put underway. It is a big thing, has millions in it, and is going through. 500 men are at work and 1,000 will be here this week, chiefly Italians.
Well, one thing that's interesting is that the attempt in 1880 by the Cape Cod Ship Canal Company was at today's Town Neck. Now, Town Neck in history was the place where all the citizens of town grazed their cattle. They would send, it was a totally open field area, and during the day the cattle would be sent there for grazing, and that's the area that this company decided to dig for this canal, which is very odd because, as we know, the canal today is nowhere near Town Neck. It's also been said that there's still a ditch that remains there somewhere along Town Neck Road where these people, the Italian immigrants, did their digging. So I'm still looking for it, but it's somewhere along Town Neck Road, we're told.
Seaside Press, October 2nd, 1880. The Italians, who are laborers on the canal, seem to be a quiet, peaceable set so far, and the fears of midnight marauders, brawls, and other disturbances on account of their presence have not been realized. They are fond of cider, which probably takes the place of the sour wine of their native land. But they do not use that to excess, and use very little, if any, beer or other liquors.
But the Italians were never paid. When food ran out, they became angry and frustrated. Some local politicians called this the Neapolitan Revolt and claimed that Sandwich was for a week under arms.
The New York Times, October 21st, 1880. The Italian canalmen today have a new scheme afoot for securing their dues. The chief of the state police this morning ascertained from one of the interpreters that the men propose to take into their custody a contractor Dreisbeck, remove him to their barracks, and hold him as a hostage until their claims are satisfied.
Workers marched to number 4 Jarvis Street, where the company had its offices. The contractor was staying at the Central House, on the site of today's Daniel Webster Inn, and a rush into the hotel was also being threatened by the workers. At Post Office Square, which is now the intersection of Main and Jarvis Streets, an interpreter explained the matter more fully to the workers. According to one report, this was the opportune time to get the contractor out the back door of the hotel, down along the marshes to the Sandwich Depot, and aboard the midnight train to New York.
In 1880, when the Italians marched themselves down to Post Office Square, that area of town looks very much today like it did back then, with one notable exception. In the center of Jarvis Street, there was a very large elm tree, and that was the focal point of town. Of course, that elm tree is gone now, and what is there instead is a wonderful tribute to the two men who died during World War I, and they are recognized in a tablet right there in that intersection of Jarvis and Main.
The next day, the laborers roamed the streets of Sandwich seeking food in exchange for odd jobs. It was quite sad, even pathetic. They were unable to speak English. They were strangers in an alien land.
Seaside Press, October 23rd, 1880. We think that under the circumstances, considering the justice of their demand and their inability to understand and talk our language, that they were quite as orderly as any equal number of laborers of any nationality. At the same time, we believe that the contractors are acting in good faith and that the trouble is at headquarters. The wild and extravagant reports that have got into some of the daily papers are as unjust as they are uncalled for. Sandwich was never more quiet, with the exception of the little demonstration Tuesday, than it has been since the commencement of work on the canal.
Eventually, fear and resentment gave way to sympathy. Some residents even found jobs for the Italians. The town of Sandwich paid for food for the workers and arranged to return them to New York City. They were sent in groups of 60 per day in spare cars hitched to the back of the nightly train to New York. By November 1st of 1880, they were all gone. For the next 29 years, there were more starts and stops until finally, in 1909, August Belmont started work on what would be, at last, a successful canal project. Belmont was a man of many talents. He invented spiked running shoes, built the Belmont racetrack, and the New York City subway system. He was related to Commodore Perry, and he thought a canal at Cape Cod would be a wonderful tribute to Perry. Belmont had substantial financial backing and worked with William Barclay Parsons, a visionary civil engineer. The Cape Cod Canal was finally completed on July 29, 1914, widened by the Army Corps of Engineers in the 1930s, and remains today the widest sea-level canal in the world.